On the 20 slides shown below, I present the original photographs of the Second World War from the German archive, which are in my collection. These photos are from my collection department, Wehrmacht on the Eastern and Western Fronts. If you like it, subscribe to my YouTube, like it, so you don't miss the new weekly presentations. If you would like to order 5 inches by 7 inches copies of these photos from the original, you can specify which photos you would like to receive. Laboratory quality. Enjoy your viewing. The Russian Liberation Army, abbreviated as ROA, also known as the Vlasov Army, Vlasovskaya Armia, was a collaborationist formation, primarily composed of Russians, that fought under German command during World War II. The army was led by Andrei Vlasov, a Red Army general who had defected, and members of the army are often referred to as Vlasovci. In 1944, it became known as the Armed Forces of the Committee for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, abbreviated as versus CONRA. Vlasov agreed to collaborate with Nazi Germany after having been captured on the Eastern Front. The soldiers under his command were mostly former Soviet prisoners of war but also included White Russian émigrés, some of whom were veterans of the anti-communist White Army from the Russian Civil War, 1917–23. On 14 November 1944, it was officially renamed the Armed Forces of the Committee for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, with the Conring formed as a political body to which the army pledged loyalty. On 28 January 1945, it was officially declared that the Russian divisions no longer formed part of the German army, but would directly be under the command of CONRA. In May 1945, members of the ROA switched sides and joined the anti-Nazi Prague uprising. The Committee for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, abbreviated as Russian, CONRA, was a committee composed of military and civilian Nazi collaborators from territories of the Soviet Union, most being Russians. It was founded by Nazi Germany on 14 November 1944, in Prague, Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, purposely chosen because it was a Slavic city that was still under Axis control. The goals of the committee were embodied in a document known as the Prague Manifesto. The manifesto's 14 points guaranteed the freedom of speech, press, religion, and assembly, as well as a right to self-determination of any ethnic group living in territories belonging to Russia. The Prague Manifesto did not contain any explicit anti-Semitic or other racially inspired rhetoric, which caused a conflict with many Nazi propagandists. The chairman of the committee was General Andrei Vlasov, who also commanded the Russian Liberation Army. The committee was viewed as the political arm of the Russian Liberation Army, although it also united several Ukrainian and other ethnic forces that were anti-Soviet. After the surrender of Germany to the Allies, the committee ceased to operate. During the immediate post-war period, several new organizations sprang up that intended to continue the committee's goal of fighting communism, i.e., the Union of the St. Andrew Flag, the Committee of United Vlasovites, the Union of Battle for the Liberation of the Peoples of Russia, started by veterans of the committee and the Russian Liberation Army who managed to escape forced repatriation to the Soviet Union. Russian volunteers who enlisted into the German army, Wehrmacht here, wore the patch of the Russian Liberation Army. These volunteers, called HUI, roughly meaning volunteers, were not under any Russian command or control, they were exclusively under German command carrying out various non-combat duties. A number of them were employed at the Battle of Stalingrad, where it was estimated that as much as 1/4 of the Sixth Army's strength was USSR citizens. Soon, several German commanders began to use them in small armed units for various tasks, including combat against Soviet partisans, driving vehicles, carrying wounded, and delivering supplies. Meanwhile, the newly captured Soviet General Vlasov, along with his German and Russian allies, was desperately lobbying the German High Command, hoping that the green light would be given for the formation of a real armed force that would be exclusively under Russian control. They were able to win over only Alfred Rosenberg to some extent. Although Hitler's staff repeatedly refused to even consider the idea, Vlasov and his allies reasoned that Hitler would eventually come to realize the futility of a war against the USSR without winning over the Russian people, and respond to Vlasov's demands. Irrespective of the political wrangling over Vlasov and the status of the ROA, by mid-1943 several hundred thousand ex-Soviet volunteers were serving in the German forces, either as Heevis or in Eastern Volunteer Units, referred to as Osteinheiten, Eastern Units, or Landeseigenverband. These latter were generally deployed in a security role at the rear of the armies and army groups in the East, where they constituted a major part of the German effort to counter the activity of Soviet partisan forces, dating as far back as early 1942. The Germans were, however, always concerned about their reliability. Following the German defeats in the summer of 1943, the units began to disintegrate. On the 12th of September, for example, Second Army had to withdraw Sturmbtl. OK2 in order to deal with what was described as several mutinies and desertions of Eastern units. The 14th of September communication from the Army states that in the recent period, Huey absenteeism had risen considerably. Following a series of attempted or successful mutinies, and a surge in desertions, the Germans decided in September 1943 that the reliability of the units had fallen to a level where they were more a liability than an asset. In an October 1943 report, the 8th Army concluded grimly, all local volunteers are unreliable during enemy contact. Principal reason of unreliability is the employment of these volunteers in the East. 2 days previously, the German army had given permission to the KTB to take harsh measures in the event of further cases of rebellion or unreliability, investing regimental commanders with far-reaching powers to hold summary courts and execute the verdicts. Following the German defeats in the summer of 1943, the units began to disintegrate. On the 12th of September, for example, Second Army had to withdraw Sturmbtl. OK2 in order to deal with what was described as several mutinies and desertions of Eastern units. The 14th of September communication from the Army states that in the recent period, Huey absenteeism had risen considerably. Following a series of attempted or successful mutinies, and a surge in desertions, the Germans decided in September 1943 that the reliability of the units had fallen to a level where they were more a liability than an asset. In an October 1943 report, the 8th Army concluded grimly, all local volunteers are unreliable during enemy contact. Principal reason of unreliability is the employment of these volunteers in the East. 2 days previously, the German army had given permission to the KTB to take harsh measures in the event of further cases of rebellion or unreliability, investing regimental commanders with far-reaching powers to hold summary courts and execute the verdicts. Following the German defeats in the summer of 1943, the units began to disintegrate. On the 12th of September, for example, Second Army had to withdraw Sturmbtl. OK2 in order to deal with what was described as several mutinies and desertions of Eastern units. The 14th of September communication from the Army states that in the recent period, Huey absenteeism had risen considerably. Following a series of attempted or successful mutinies, and a surge in desertions, the Germans decided in September 1943 that the reliability of the units had fallen to a level where they were more a liability than an asset. In an October 1943 report, the 8th Army concluded grimly, all local volunteers are unreliable during enemy contact. Principal reason of unreliability is the employment of these volunteers in the East. 2 days previously, the German army had given permission to the KTB to take harsh measures in the event of further cases of rebellion or unreliability, investing regimental commanders with far-reaching powers to hold summary courts and execute the verdicts. A small group of ROA volunteers fought against the Red Army on the 9th of February 1945. Their fighting spirit earned them the praise of Heinrich Himmler. The only active combat the Russian Liberation Army undertook against the Red Army was by the Oder River on the 11th of April 1945, largely at the insistence of Himmler, as a test of the army's reliability. After 3 days, the outnumbered 1st Division had to retreat. On the 28th of January 1945, it was officially declared that the Russian divisions no longer formed part of the German army, but would be directly under the command of Conrad. Vlasov then ordered the 1st Division to march south to concentrate all Russian anti-communist forces loyal to him. As an army, he reasoned, they could all surrender to the Allies on favorable terms, which particularly meant no repatriation to the Soviet Union. Vlasov sent several secret delegations to the Allies to begin negotiating a surrender, hoping they would sympathize with the goals of ROA and potentially use it in an inevitable future war with the USSR. The Vlasovites entered the battle against units of the Red Army for the first time on February 8, 1945. On that day, the anti-tank detachment of Colonel I.K. Sakharov achieved partial success in an attack near the town of Nalevin on a position occupied by units of the 990th Regiment of the 230th Stalinist Rifle Division. On April 13, 2 Vlasov infantry regiments attacked the bridgehead held by the forces of the 415th Separate Machine Gun and Artillery Battalion from the 119th Fortified Area of the 33rd Army of the 1st Belarusian Front. During the first attack, the Vlasovites occupied the first line of trenches, having achieved success where the Germans could not achieve it for 2 months. But then, during the battle, the division commander, Major General S.K. Bunyashchenko, refused to continue unpromising attacks due to the strong artillery cover of the bridgehead from the eastern bank of the Oder. He carefully led the regiments out of the battle, and the fighting qualities of the Vlasovites were mentioned in a positive context in the report of the High Command of the Wehrmacht, OKW, dated April 14, 1945. The ROA was formed mainly from Soviet prisoners of war who fell into German captivity, mainly at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, during the retreat of the Red Army. The creators of the ROA was declared as a military formation created to liberate Russia from communism, December 27, 1942. Lieutenant General Andrei Vlasov, who was captured in 1942, together with General Boyarsky, proposed in a letter to the German command to organize a ROA. General Fyodor Trukin was appointed Chief of Staff, General Vladimir Boyarsky was appointed his deputy, and Colonel Andrei Neryanin was appointed head of the operational department of the headquarters. By February 1945, only one division, the 1st Infantry, 600th Infantry, was fully organized, under the command of General Sergei Bunyashchenko. Formed at Munsingen, it fought briefly on the Oder front before switching sides and helping the Czechs liberate Prague. A 2nd Division, the 2nd Infantry, 650th Infantry, was incomplete when it left Lageruberg but was sent into action under the command of General Mikhail Meandrov. This division was joined in large numbers by Eastern workers, which caused it to nearly double in size as it marched south. A third, the 3rd Infantry, 700th German Infantry, had only begun formation. Several other Russian units, such as the Russian Corps, 15th SS Cossack Cavalry Corps of General Helmut von Pannwitz, the Cossack Camp of Ataman Demanov, Cossack General Andrei Shkaro and other primarily white émigré formations, had agreed to become a part of Vlasov's army. However, their membership remained de jure as the turn of events did not permit Vlasov to use the troops in any operation, even reliable communications were often impossible. However, there was antagonism between former Soviet prisoners of war and white emigrants, and the latter were gradually forced out of the leadership of the ROA. Most of them served in other Russian volunteer formations not associated with the ROA. Only a few days before the end of the war formally attached to the ROA, the Russian Corps, the Brigade of General A.V. Turkul in Austria, the 1st Russian National Army, the Vyag Regiment of Colonel M.A. Semenov, a separate regiment of Colonel Krzyżanowski, as well as in Cossack formations, 15th Cossack Cavalry Corps and Cossack Camp. During the march south, the 1st Division of the ROA came to the help of the Czech partisans in the Prague uprising against the German occupation, which started on May 5, 1945. Vlasov was initially reluctant to agree to that move, but ultimately did not resist General Bunyashchenko's decision to fight against the Germans. The 1st Division engaged in battle with Waffen-SS units that had been sent to level the city. The ROA units, armed with heavy weaponry, fended off the relentless SS assault, and together with the Czech insurgents succeeded in preserving most of Prague from destruction. Due to the predominance of communists in the new Czech Rada Council, the 1st Division had to leave the city the very next day and tried to surrender to U.S. Third Army of General Patton. Citation needed: the Allies, however, had little interest in aiding or sheltering the ROA, fearing such aid would harm relations with the USSR. Helmut von Pannwitz, 1898–1947, Lieutenant General of the 1st Cossack Cavalry Division, Obergruppenführer and Feldhauptmann of the 15th SS Cossack Cavalry Corps. A man who died in a Soviet prison because he stood by his men, when he could have abandoned them. The year 1938 saw Pannwitz promoted to the rank of major, and after the Austrian Anschluss he was appointed squadron commander of the newly created 11th Cavalry Reg. When the war broke out in 1939, this regiment was at first assigned various observation duties. Von Pannwitz's service in the Polish campaign brought him a 1939 clasp to his First World War Iron Cross. When the Russian campaign began in 1941, von Pannwitz was given command of an advanced detachment which approached regimental strength. The detachment crossed the river Bug at Brest-Litovsk and often led the main German elements by 150 kilometers. His leadership and daring were recognized at the beginning of August by promotion to lieutenant colonel and the award of the coveted Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Only a month later, von Pannwitz was nominated for yet another honor, the Oak Leaves clasp to the Knight's Cross. Before this could be awarded, von Pannwitz was transferred to General von Reichenau's 6th Army. Given the astounding successes of von Pannwitz's unit, someone on von Reichenau's staff concluded that he and his advanced detachment could accomplish even greater objectives. Shortly after, Pannwitz became ill and could no longer command mobile troops. In December 1941 he was transferred to HQ, where he was assigned as an advisor to the general commanding German mobile troops. On his own initiative, he began developing a plan for organizing the various Soviet nationalities into major combat units. He observed volunteer units and noted German policy required many Soviets to work as heavies, driving trucks, working in kitchens and loading supplies. More than 1,000 soldiers were initially taken into Allied custody by the 44th Infantry Division and other U.S. troops. In a move that Allied command kept secret for many years, they were then forcefully handed over to the Soviets by the Allies, due to a previous agreement between Churchill and Stalin that all ROA soldiers would be returned to the USSR. Some Allied officers who were sympathetic to the ROA soldiers permitted them to escape in small groups into the American-controlled zones. A citation needed. The Soviet government labeled all ROA soldiers, Vlasovci, as traitors, and those who were repatriated were tried and sentenced to detention in prison camps. Vlasov and several other leaders of the ROA were tried and hanged in Moscow on August 1, 1946. The idea to organize a division of volunteers from Galicia was proposed by the German governor of District Galicia, Otto Wächter. He suggested creation of a Waffen-SS division composed of Galician volunteers and designed for regular combat on the Eastern Front. The creation of 14th Voluntary Division SS Galician was announced in April 1943 at ceremonies throughout Galicia. The 14th Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, 1st Galician, known as the 14th SS Volunteer Division Galicia, German, 14. SS Freiwilligen Division Galician, prior to 1944, was a World War II German military formation made up predominantly of military volunteers with a Ukrainian ethnic background from the area of Galicia, later also with some Slovaks. In total an estimated circa 53,000 men enlisted for service in the division. Of these, 42,000 were called up during the first recruitment phase, which took place in May and June 1943, from which only 27,000 were deemed fit for military service and 13,000 were enlisted. To boost the recruitment figures, the height minimum requirement was lowered from 1.65 meters to 1.61 meters. Formed in 1943, it was largely destroyed in the Battle of Brody, reformed, and saw action in Slovakia, Yugoslavia, and Austria before being renamed the 1st Division of the Ukrainian National Army and surrendering to the Western Allies by the 10th of May 1945.